Love that one. Hey, welcome. My name is Krista Sukup, and I'm coming to you from Blue Cottage Agency in Minnesota. And welcome to our author talk today with Michael Farmer and Manuela Schneider. Manuela's coming to us from Germany, and Michael's coming to us from Virginia. And we have guests here today, about 25 guests here joining us from all over the country, and we welcome all of you and thank you for joining in on this. We are going to have this recorded and put on YouTube so you can watch it later, and if you're coming in late, you can watch it or have to leave, you can watch it there. So I'm going to start by introducing our guest today, Michael Farmer. Michael Farmer combines 10 plus years of research into 19th century Apache history and culture with Southwest living experience to fill his stories with a genuine sense of time and place. He's a retired PhD physicist. His awards include Western Writers of America Spur finalist, New Mexico Book Award, and the Will Rogers Gold Medallion. He lives in Smithfield, Virginia. If you want to find out more about Michael Farmer, you can visit his website, wmichaelfarmer.com. Manuela Schneider was born and raised in Germany. She has a love of American Native and Western history. She's fascinated with pioneer life, cowboy heroes, and treacherous outlaws. She had a successful career designing motorcycle fashion in the European market. In 2021, Manuela was awarded Cowpokes International Film Festival for 2 categories, songwriting and best manuscript. She is the author of 4 books. If you want to find out more about Manuela, it's manuelaschneider.com. Today, we are going to have these 2 authors discuss each other's books. They each have read each other's books. They are both members of Western Writers of America and are happy to have a conversation about each other's books. We're going to be discussing Michael's book, The Odyssey of Geronimo, the 23 Years a Prisoner of War. It's a novel. He does write both fiction and nonfiction. I love this quote. So this is about Geronimo. He was hated by some of his own people, loved by others, but respected by all. The Odyssey of Geronimo, based on history and Apache culture, but told through his eyes, using the truth from fiction, is a revealing epic of his strengths, weaknesses, and character. This book was the Will Rogers Bronze Medallion Award winner, and it's published by 5 Star. Manuela's book we're going to talk about is The Colt of Destiny. It's a thrilling Western adventure and one cursed weapon. Here's some quotes from reviewers who have read it. Do not read this book before going to bed. And The Colt of Destiny was a page turner. It kept my interest to the very end. It's available in English and German, and it's published by Wolfpack Publishing. So sit back and enjoy the discussion between these 2 amazing authors, and we are super happy you're able to join us. I am going to stop share screen, and we will be able to see our participants. Manuela, I will have you start by talking to Michael about his book.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's a great honor to be here and to have all the visitors joining us. I was always interested in the Apaches, American natives in specific, the Apaches, and I read books, but this book actually really got me. I honestly admit by the last third of the book, I cried because I always wondered, what does it feel like to be a prisoner of war for so many years? I knew that he wanted to go back to his homeland so urgently. Now, I came across some questions in that book. It's written in the first person, and it's an unbelievable odyssey that this man and his few band members and his families had to face. So, Michael, where does your fascination for the Apache come from? You do not live in the Southwest, neither are you American native. So how did that come up?
Well, I think that's probably a pretty good question. I was a kid that grew up in the country, and my friends and I often played Indians based on what we had seen in the movies. And in my day, that meant people like Audie Murphy and Gary Cooper and what have you. And I distinctly remember one day when I was in the 4th grade, I was reading a book about Indians, and I saw the stories about how the Plains Indians were forced onto reservations, and I can remember feeling serious anger about that. I didn't think that that was fair or right, and so I've always had a feeling for Indians. I really didn't, in my adult life, didn't get into them until I started writing my first novel. And when I was writing that, I really wasn't intending for it to be a novel. I was just trying to find some answers to one of the big mysteries of the Southwest, which was the Fountain murders. And in the story that I wrote, I wanted to have the little boy survive, and the most straightforward way for him to survive by my measure was for a Mescalero Apache policeman find him and save him. And that was the start of my interest in Apaches. It turned out I had to do some research on what they were really like, and I use the Apaches because they have a reservation that's close to where the Fountain murders took off, and so you know, I over the time that I lived in the Southwest, I lived in Las Cruces for about 15 years. And I wound up going to a lot of places that show up in one form or the other in my books. And what I found after I really got to researching it was that they really have an extraordinary culture. When you see movies about Apaches, they're always
they don't do justice.
Bloodthirsty savages. And when I wrote my first book, I did a little research and read a quote by a man named Paul Blazer, who was interviewed in 1955 by Dr. C.L. Sunningson, who was one of the great historians of the Southwest. And Blazer told Sunningson that his father and his grandfather had operated a store on the Mescalero Reservation by invitation from the Apaches there. And he said that it really hurt him to hear Apaches called savages. He said, you know, Teddy Roosevelt was a savage. And he said they would come in the store, he'd give them a smoke, and they would sit and talk about their folk tales and what have you. And they really made an impression on him. And I think I have come to the same conclusions through the research that I've done.
Okay. Now, you wrote the book in first person, and I really had the feeling that Geronimo talks to me over the decades. You know, it's like, it was as if he talked to me, you know, unbelievable. Now, how did you manage to put yourself into Geronimo's shoes and, you know, sounding like him and telling the tale from his point of view? I can imagine that was not easy.
Well, I didn't think that it would be, but it turned out that while it wasn't easy, it was fairly straightforward. One of the things that I learned when I researched this thing was that I really needed to learn what the Apache culture was like. It's really quite different than anything that we have, obviously, but I found some amazing parallels. They, to my mind, their culture was like a prototypical Hebrew culture. They didn't eat pork. They had the same kind of laws. If you had multiple wives and your brother had a wife and she died, it was your responsibility to take care of her and be sure that if possible she had children. And you know, it goes on. It's really remarkable. Now, I'm not saying that they were Hebrews, but that's the way the culture
very close
factored out. And I read a lot of one of the great ethnologists of the 20th century, Morris Opler, put out a book called An Apache Lifeway that really gives you pretty good insights into that. And I've read a lot of the public pronouncements that Geronimo had when he talked to Teddy Roosevelt and some of the men who managed the Army and the reservations. And there's also a book that's a classic, and if you're going to write about Apaches, I strongly advise that you read. It's called Inde, which was by Eve Ball, Nora Hinn, and Linda Sanchez. And it's basically the record of the oral history that Eve Ball recorded when she, living right next to the reservation, wound up talking to the old Apaches, the last survivors of the Apache Wars. And so, after a while, you read these things where they're talking straight away, and she's not correcting their English or what have you. That's the way that they talked, and she wrote it down that way.
Okay.
That's where you kind of pick it up. And I don't claim to be an expert by any stretch of the imagination.
So Geronimo was known to have done a lot of killings. I mean, it was warfare, and people claimed in Arizona and Mexico that he killed in rather very cruel ways, that they tortured people. Now, you have written the book in first person. How do you personally feel about Geronimo? Do you feel like he was a cruel man? Do you pity him for the later on being a prisoner for so many years? You know, how do you personally feel about Geronimo after having written this book in first person?
Well, frankly, I don't like him much. I wouldn't want him as a next door neighbor, but as the slide that Krista showed, I have a great respect for him, because you look over his life, and it was just one problem after another that he had to face, and he was brilliant in a tactical warfare sense, and he was pretty wise in terms of tribal politics. But he to me, he seemed like he couldn't think strategically, couldn't think beyond like the next few months or the next few days, depending on the situation. And so I think he's a man that's much to be admired, but I don't think you would really want him as a friend.
Okay. Now, how long did it take you to write a book, including the research? Because it contains a lot of different episodes and details and historical events. So generally, like giving an idea how long the entire book took until you were able to send it off to the publisher?
I wrote the first draft of the manuscript in about 8 months, and
Okay.
it got to the publisher after about a year when I first started writing. As far as the research goes, it wasn't a matter of sitting down day after day and reading, as you well know. But I would say that it was 3 or 4 years with following up on what the history books had to say and cross-referencing and all of that stuff. But the real pivot point was reading that book about Apache culture, because if you can understand the culture, then you can understand their history, and it's not unexpected.
So that's where you also got the single episodes from understanding the culture, plus following the historical records that they have, because they are like military records. We brought them here, we brought them there, we brought them to this fort. I mean, it's all kind of like military logbooks written down, and that's how you created the single episodes, is it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
There are a lot of what I would call shameful episodes in this business, where once he surrendered, and he surrendered because General Miles, who later became Secretary of the Army, basically lied to him to get him to surrender, so he overcame a lot, and I think that it's a credit to his part that he did, and he was always admired, I think, by his own people, but a lot of them hated him, and so it's kind of hard to, given those constraints, it's not hard to construct scenes that there's a little nugget of in the history books to give the readers some meat and sinew to go on the bones of the history.
Well, I do believe that his own people who hated him, they hated rather the consequences of his stubborn doing, because he was like having a band of 50 warriors and women at the end, and they played hide and seek with the entire army section of, at one time, I think containing 1,500 soldiers, and they were not able to catch those 50 people. And so I think his own people were scared. They wanted to go to the reservation and say, like, we don't want to face the punishment for all this.
No, the problem was that the last time that Geronimo left the reservation was in 1885, and he took with him 125 people.
Yep.
Most of them were women and children. And the rest, about 70% of the band stayed on the reservation, minded their own business, planted their crops, were peaceful farmers. When Geronimo surrendered with everybody else, a bootlegger pulled him aside, and I think the bootlegger was part of the so-called Tucson ring, who was interested in getting contracts from the Army, and told him that as soon as they crossed the border, General Crook, who he had surrendered to, was going to turn him and the other major players over to civilians to be hung. And so he and Naichi, who was his chief, gathered up most of their relatives and took off. Well, this is after they are supposed to be going to Fort Bowie to board a train for 2 years in Florida. General Crook had already taken off and told the Secretary of the Army, who was then General Sheridan, that everything was just fine. And then he gets word that Geronimo has broken away, and Sheridan went nuts. Basically, Crook had to resign, and he sent him to the Platte River Command. But getting rid of Crook was the worst thing that could have happened to those people, because Crook had convinced Sheridan that it was a bad thing to try to take them someplace besides where they were. And after Crook was fired, everybody was in agreement they had to go, and so off they went.
Now, I have, over the years, traveling to Arizona, I've collected books and postcards showing antique and historical pictures of warriors and leaders and famous women of the Apaches. Reading your book actually made those pictures, suddenly there was a story to the picture, which was amazing. They came alive, you know. I was wondering, I know that Geronimo is buried at the Fort Sills Apache Cemetery now. Have you ever visited any of those forts where he was captivated, or the cemetery where he's buried?
Yeah, I've been to the cemetery at Fort Sill, but I've not been to the forts. He was at Fort Pickens in Florida, and it was just his little group of men, about 18 of them. Everybody else, nearly 400 people, were stuffed into living at Castillo de San Marcos, Fort Marion at St. Augustine. And so he wound up being shipped from Fort Pickens to Mount Vernon, which is about 40 miles north of Mobile, and then the whole shooting match to Fort Sill. So I've been to Fort Sill. I've been to a number of other places where he was, but they weren't forts, and usually he was a free man when he was there.
Yeah, it is said that kind of bone collecting secret community stole his skull a couple of years after he was buried there, and it seems that certain Apache tribal members have a lawsuit against them, and they want to have them return the skull, because they say, like, you cannot just, like, you know, you take the skull and you take the arm bone and you take the sacrum, whatever, you know, it's like it's sacrilege for them. And so you ever heard about that story?
Oh yeah, it's up front. I think the Apaches are really wrong about that, because around 2006, a researcher who was doing a story on the Yaleys who were in the Air Force in World War I, uncovered a letter where they were talking about stealing Geronimo's head. And the description they gave of it showed that they were at the wrong grave when they took the skull. The actual Apache cemetery was across some swampy ground about 3 miles from the cemetery where they were. And the grave that they got into, you'll love this. It was a Kiowa chief named Kicking Bird. You might remember Kicking Bird in
Dances with wolves.
Yeah, right, exactly. But
Okay.
he was Geronimo was buried down in the ground with everybody else. These guys broke into a tomb. They had to use an axe to break off the lock to get into it, and so I don't think they got to Geronimo.
So probably not right.
Yeah.
Right. Do you still hear me, guys? Okay, I can't hear Michael anymore.
You can't? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now you're back.
Yeah.
My last question for you, do you know, are there any descendants, family members still alive from Geronimo?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question because Geronimo had 10 wives, at least 10 wives, maybe some say as many as 12, and I count at least 14 children and maybe one or two more. And when he passed away, the only surviving children that had children were the two that he had by his Mescalero wife, who he had originally kidnapped and made her his wife, a little girl named Lena, and a son that he didn't know he had for about 15 or 16 years, named Robert. And Lena, he had sent back to Mescalero in order to save her from having to live down in the deep piney woods of the Mount Vernon.
Like they got all sick there, right?
Yeah,
like
right.
tuberculosis, malaria.
Lena and Robert have had children, and there are quite a few direct descendants living there at Mescalero. In fact, I know one of his great grandsons, a young man named Pius Lacroix Garcia.
What an honor! What an honor! Well, as I said, the book gave a voice to all the research I had done before. It made it way more lively, and it left food for thought, and it really, really touched me. I think it was the most pleasurous book I ever read in a long, long time. And it won't be the first and the last time that I read it, because I think if I love a book like that, I probably end up reading it again and again and again. And it was an unbelievable honor to read that book and to jot those questions together. And amazing. I love it, and it deeply touched me. I really want to thank you. Really want to thank you for that opportunity and for giving Geronimo a voice.
Thank you.
Michael, we have a question from one of our participants. So Candace is asking, do you have a similar interest concerning the Native Americans in your neck of the woods? Have you written about the Cherokee or Shawnee or others?
Actually, the Indians in my neck of the woods, I lived right down the road, maybe 2 miles from what was originally an ancient Indian village. But the Indians that I would be writing about were Powhatan and Jamestown and that kind of thing. And I've had people kind of goad me to write something about that, but I'm kind of reluctant to, because I really don't know the culture, and what little we know about those Indians we've gotten from the English writings and reading between the lines about how their lives actually were. And so I think if I did write about them, I would write about a story that the primary researcher for the local Indians says probably didn't happen, but it would be an interesting story nevertheless, which was about a young Indian that the Spaniards took out of Virginia because they claimed Virginia at that time. Was so impressed with him that they carried him to the King of Spain and introduced him. He eventually became a monk, and he came back as a translator when the Spaniards tried to establish a religious base here in Virginia. And he was with them a few weeks and took off and found his family. And the bottom line is he wound up massacring the monks that came with him. So it's a tragic story, but it's also pretty interesting.
Interesting. Thank you, Michael, for that. So, Michael, it's your turn now. You read Manuela's book, and what questions do you have for her about her book?
Yeah, that was a great piece of work. As one of the ladies said, when she started reading it, she couldn't put it down. And I think that's the measure that we all like to hear about. It impressed me that it seems to use a classic tale about cursed or blessed weapons like Lord of the Rings or the Excalibur, the sword of King Arthur. So where did you get the idea to do Arma del Diablo?
Well, actually, I visit Tombstone since many years. I have been there countless times. So you run into those famous Tombstone characters. Of one was Johnny Ringo, quite a famous pistolary there. And he was found dead one day sitting next to a creek. And this was supposed to be a suicide. And it's still a mystery to today. Johnny Ringo's suicide gun was found on his body. And I asked a Western movie production friend, I say, hey, you know anything about that gun? He said, oh yeah, it's in private hands, perfectly tracked for 139 years. That gun is still in existence. He gave me all the details. And now this gun was in the hands of a very, very ruthless, reckless pistolero, and plus he committed suicide with it. So I love mysteries about artifacts, and now I knew the gun was really is still existing. So that was where the idea was born. Funny part, 10 days after Arma del Diablo got published, the gun went for an auction by the private owner, and it was sold for somewhere around $112,000 US, 10 days after the book was published, and it was never sold for decades. Right after the publishing, boom, bang, it went into sales. And that was kind of like amazing. But
You might have frozen up.
Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
watch chain.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. I can't hear.
Can you unmute, Manuela? Sorry.
Okay, you hear
Okay.
me again? Okay.
Yep.
Actually, I have one of my Tombstone friends here, Karen Collins, another German who is waving. She hooked in from Pachuca. So that was the main idea, the very strange suicide and the gun that was still in existence up to today, perfectly tracked, one of the rare weapons that was tracked, documented nonstop from production date on.
You had a very clever plot in the way that you laid it out. It started out with some short stories like pearls on a line, and then you flash forward, flash back.
Yeah.
How did you develop your plot? Did you outline it first, or did it just come develop as you wrote it?
That was really eerie, because I know a lot of authors, they have like plot ideas, they put them on a board and then they connect them. And I had only this basic idea. I sat down and then I had the basic idea for the second episode where the brother shoots brother. It just literally came while writing. And up to today, sometimes I don't know where the ideas come from. It's eerie. Those characters really become alive and they take over. It's I had 2 basic ideas, and after this 30 or 45 pages, it just came automatic. I didn't jot down notes. I did a little research while writing, but it developed. Sometimes I take long walks through nature, and that is where I get my best ideas from, actually, taking walks out in the woods. And I come back and I got to write this down before I forget. So it was not a planned plot, actually.
Yeah, the best stories write themselves, don't they?
Yeah, true.
The little short stories that you had in there about the characters, I was interested in your Cain and Abel like story. Did you base that on some historical story you had heard, or?
Well, the characters in the story, Johnny Ringo was an existing character, and the places, like for the others, it's about a gun that is cursed and it appears again and again in different decades, every time connected to a tragical murder within families. And so they try to solve in modern times, they try to solve what is wrong with this gun? Why is it connected to all these murders? And the places where it takes place are really existing. The monastery of Einsiedeln in Switzerland is an existing monastery. The 3 padres that I created in the book are existing people, friends of mine. Brother Alexander is my first great cousin, and the monastery in Spain, Santo Domingo de Silos, is an existing monastery, and both monasteries are close to 1,000 years old. Plus, there's a small episode with Mr. Colt, who was the manufacturing, Colt Manufacturing, firearms manufacturing company was founded by Mr. Colt. The cemetery that plays a major role in the book is actually existing, and the people were actually buried at that time frame. And Mr. Colt is actually even buried on that very cemetery. So it's more true places, and nowadays characters, historical characters, is mainly Johnny Ringo and Mr. Colt.
Very interesting. I'll ask you the same question you asked me. How long did your research take?
Research, writing the book in German, translating it into English, until publishing was literally 4 months altogether.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
I had some sleepless nights, but this story bugged me. It never let me go. And I really have to sit down. And that bad part was I was just a couple of weeks or 3-4 months after severe spine surgery. So I could barely sit on my butt. But that story said, like, you're going to write me now. More ibuprofen. You're going to write me now. And I just had to go on, you know. So 4 months.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you write your stories first in German and then translate them into English?
Well, the first 3 books I actually first wrote in English for the reason they are about pioneer times and the Wild West. And I wrote them mainly for my friends, for the area I truly, truly love. I'm very fond of my American friends, and I thought, and it was the harder and rockier road, but I thought out of a matter of respect and deeply felt love for the United States and my friends, the least what I can do is write it in their language, which I did. Little did I know that, Wolfpack later on, they say, like, we want to try what's going on the German market. Can you translate them back into German? Which I did again. But Arma del Diablo, this time I wrote it in German first, because I have more vocabulary in German, and I wanted to show more variety in the different vocabulary used. So I did this one in German first, and then translated it back to English.
How do you handle the idiomatic English into German and vice versa?
Yeah, that's kind of funny. I bought a book about it, about them, and I hardly ever used the book because I caught myself. It's like a dictionary. You open it up, means that. Okay, you close the book, you type it down. That moment, I forget it. Well, I still want to learn more English because my soul home is Arizona, matter of fact, and it will never change until I take my last breath. So I want to speak the language as perfect as possible. So what I do is, we have idioms like, we say the apple doesn't fall far from the stem. You use the same. But then we have different ones, like we say, kind of mob people, beat on each other and hang out with each other, which you use birds of the same feathers flock together. It means the same. So for me, it's kind of funny. I try to research what it means rather than just looking it up. And sometimes I just laugh. And sometimes I'm astonished how many German sayings got brought over by the immigrants and are deeply planted into your language. And it's so heartwarming to see that, because I say, like, yeah, you see, we all got the same roots, no reason for differences whatsoever. Same roots. And that's the nice part of doing the research.
Your villain in Colt of Destiny was a gentleman named Gorgo Conway.
Yeah.
And I learned looking, I think it was looking in the back of your book, that Gorgo is ancient Greek for Satan. How did you find that out? I mean, it must not have been that difficult being cousins with
True. They have in Einsiedeln, they have a huge Baroque style library with over 100,000 books in there. The oldest book is 1,000 years old, handwritten Bibles. I am in the lucky position, I have access. Whatever is in Latinum, I call one of the padres, they help me to translate. And I found a book called Il Nome di Diablo, the names of the devil. And it is actually demon. Gorgon is the ancient Greek word for Lucifer. Often nowadays in Greek used as a shortcut called Gorgo. And I Googled the name Gorgo later on, and I found out it's like often used as a Russian name even, it's often used as a first name, which I would be kind of careful about naming my son Gorgo. But it's actually demon gorgon, or gorgo. The short version is the Greek word for devil. And that's how I found out in the Benedictine Order Library of Switzerland.
Do you go to that monastery very often?
I couldn't go there for 2 years because they had eight of the members died on COVID. A nurse brought COVID into the monastery, which was tragic. They lost 8 of their members in 10 weeks. I love my cousin dearly, and generally I go there like at least 3 times a year, or if I have a lot of burden and sorrow on my shoulder. It's my power place where I find peace. It's incredible. You go to a monastery that's 1,000 years old. It was founded 935 after Christ. You go there, the hundreds of years of worshiping and believing in God and faith, you go there, the moment you set your foot there, you are at inner peace. The entire outside world falls off your shoulders. I love to be there. And sometimes when things get really kind of like I need to get my head clear, I'm allowed to stay in the guest rooms. I can go there a couple of days and just like lower all everyday burden. And they also help me actually. I support my mom who is dying on stage 4 cancer. So they say, you need to talk, you come, we'll talk about it. Because for them, death is so natural. And it's freeing a body that just means pain and burden. And they have a total different view on death. And when I read your book, it's harsh times, it's sad times, harsh times. But when I read your book, you mentioned that the Apaches called the place where they go when they die, the happy place. You ride your ghost pony and you go to the happy place. That made me cry in a positive way. That's what I'm gonna think when the day comes, my mom has to leave. She's gonna go to the happy place. I never thought I'm gonna take comfort out of your book for the worst moment in my life to come yet. But she's gonna ride the ghost pony to the happy place. And I will never forget you giving me that sentence, never, really.
Well, I'm honored that you think that way.
Yeah, I do. It was an unbelievable moment. And for the first time, I thought about my mom's death coming pretty soon, the next few weeks or months. And I had a smile on my face. For the first time, I was not that devastated, and I'm battling this death since 3 years, but I never thought, and that is why I love America, my friends, so much. They touch my heart and they make my soul sing. It's a rare gift, rare gift. And that is why I wrote the first books in English. I owe a lot to you guys. My friend Karin, who is watching, she's the rock in my tide. You know, she would text out of the blue to me like, hey, how are you doing? I got a feeling like, are you okay? Writing books, exchanging stories. We need to tell stories, even if it's sad stories, because the next generations need them to learn.
That's beautiful, Manuela. We do have a question from our guests that I would like to ask you. It comes from Sue Reddy from Ever Ready Book Reviews. She said, Manuela, I did love your book, and it absolutely held my attention from beginning to end. This book is a departure from your other novels, which usually have women as lead protagonists. How challenging was this shift for you when you were writing this book?
Not at all, because as a hobby, I loved ancient Egypt, and I read the books about Howard Carter. So I could place Michael Kent into that, like, you know, like treasure hunting guy. I'm very interested in artifacts. And for change, I wanted to write something less romantic, less female, because I also intended to hit more the male audience with that.
Thank you. We have 8 minutes here and we have a few more questions. Michael, Karen wants to know what you think of the movie Geronimo starring Wes Studi.
I really liked the movie. It was entertaining, but it's like they put the history into a blender and flipped the switch. You know, they had things happening way before they actually happened, and they kind of got the characters mixed up. But I really thought it was a pretty good movie. I can't think of the gentleman who played Geronimo, but I would.
Wes Studi.
Right. Yeah. Wes Wes. I would love to do a screenplay where of Geronimo's Odyssey and have him play it as an old man. He's getting to be on in years, and I think he would be perfect for the part.
Yeah, true.
Yes. Bob Yoho has a question for you, Manuela. The premise of your book reminds me of an old television series called Dead Man's Gun. Have you ever seen that?
I haven't seen it yet, but I know the title. Well, they broadcast the Bonanza, Little House on the Prairie, Dr. Quinn, and like Gunsmoke, of course, in Germany. That man's gone not, but I'm gonna look it up because I heard about it, and somebody asked me about that before, and I'm gonna try and get a hold on a copy of it. I will definitely, good reminder to do that.
Michael, can you give us the name of that book that you mentioned in the beginning on the ethnologist? Did I say that right?
Yeah, it's by Morris Opler, Opler, and it's called An Apache Life Way.
Okay, I typed it into the chat. Typed it in the chat there. Okay. Did anybody have any other questions? We met Wes Duty. It's always like Wes Duty in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Was anybody there? Was Karen, were you there? Or have you met him?
He's a very humble person, not kind of like I'm a star. He's totally natural and humble and loves to stand for pictures with people. And he's brilliant in almost every movie he does.
Yeah, I think he's
oh my God. Yeah, he's a tremendous actor. Unbelievable. He lives the character.
Michael and Manuela, we have a lot of published authors in our group today. We have writers who are working on publishing a book, and we have just fans of your books. To the writers out there, what advice do you have for them as they are working on their first manuscript, their second manuscript? What is your best writing advice that you would want to share with
You
them?
mean like me?
I have a couple minutes.
Me?
Sure, go ahead.
For me, actually, it's a lot of work. Never underestimate the work. You really have to be determined. There will be moments you have setbacks. There will be many moments you doubt yourself. But when you really go through until the end, it's the most rewarding thing. And every book you leave back a piece of yourself behind. It's like a piece of your own personality is in that book. For me personally, I'm living a dream, and if I would stop doing that, I would betray my own heart. I would betray my dream, and I would say, have you muted me? Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay. So I think believe in your dream. Be prepared for a lot of work and just go for it. Spread your wings, fly. We all have the ability to fly. We just need to spread the wings.
Yeah, my advice is to just stay with it. Don't quit and get when you're discouraged with something, because I found that I learned the most in writing when I got into something called a plot knot, which was something that was really kind of illogical and really wouldn't cut it in the story, and it took me a long time to figure it out. But it's still important that you have the stick-to-itiveness to finish the story. And even if you rewrite many times, that's not unusual.
True.
Question for you. Oh, a comment from Karen. I have an amazing book called The People Called Apache by Thomas E. Males. It's wonderful. Have you read that, Michael? Or know about it?
Actually, I don't have the strength to pick it up. It's a beautifully done book. Yes, I have it, but it's a big coffee table size book, about 1.5 inches thick, with his drawings and photographs and that kind of thing. And it's a great reference book, but it's also very entertaining to look through.
We have a couple other comments before we close up. Chris says, what a lovely pair of authors. A wonderful hour. Thank you both. I look forward to reading both books. Deborah says, this has been an excellent hour. Thank you, Manuela and Michael.
Thank you.
And other thank yous. Thank you to the authors. Wonderful event. Great to participate from Tombstone. Yay! A wonderful hour. This was wonderful discussion of your books. Manuela and Michael, stop at the bookstore after I'm stopping at the bookstore after I leave here. Wonderful conversation. Thank you, Michael, Manuela, and Krista. Thank you for your advice and wonderful presentation today, Manuela and Michael. So impressive. Love your interviews. Always wonderful to hear what lives under the written word, what lies under the written word once it's out in the world. Thank you so much. I loved this, Michael and Manuela. Thank you. Thanks to both of you for a wonderful and enlightening and discussion of your books. Fascinating insight. Oh my goodness, just so many wonderful things. So thank you.
We have a
all.
third Sherman. We have a third Sherman. Hi, Anushka.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you so
this
much.
will be on YouTube, and you can watch it again or share it with your friends if you would like to do that. You can subscribe to my brand new channel, Blue Cottage Agency. And if you're an author, reach out. We'd love to talk to you.
Thank you, Mike.